Good morning, friends. It's Saturday, and I'm back with Chapter 13 of my upcoming book, Campaign at Fort Stix. Now it's time to grab a snack, dim the lights, and let me take you into the mists of time with a story I call Attrition. The faint smell of bug spray lingered in the air of our bedroom. Not nearly as bad as it was yesterday, but still noticeable. Mark was asleep on the overstuffed chair on the front porch. He had come out there sometime in the evening complaining about the smell by his bed, and I directed him to the chair. Looking at the terrarium, I watched as the little white caterpillars crawled along the piece of carpet leaning against the glass side. A couple of them seemed to be in the process of forming cocoons, but they were not fixed in place. They dragged the cocoons along with them, which I found curious. The lace curtain covered the top and was secured by several rubber bands around the rim. It dipped down a bit near the carpet, but did not obscure my view. I was relieved Mom had not noticed the lace curtain, and as such had not thought to inquire about where the other one was. I guess the wasps commanded her entire attention. In the aftermath of Mom's bug-slaying rampage, we had been instructed to remove the cage and its deceased residents to some place that was else, outside the house. Since the wasps were soaked in bug killer and no longer of any use as scientific study specimens, I relinquished them to the custody of the burn barrel like common trash. The cage was hosed off and sat next to the garage for some future unknown purpose. I think maybe Mom felt a little bad about killing our wasps and destroying all our hard work, because in the end, she allowed us to keep the smallest caterpillars in our collection jars. The rest of the insects, though, were immediately evicted to the outdoors, where bugs belong. They were set free in the field by Fort Stix, where they scurried off in many directions. While it was nice that I at least got to have the small caterpillars, they were kind of boring, and I headed out to see what was more interesting in the world this morning. I grabbed some toast on the way outside and went to get my chores done and water garden before seeking adventures. The chickens peeped and the ducks quacked as they ran around me when I brought their food and water. The turkeys, on the other hand, gathered together in a loose bunch in a corner and eyed me warily. They did not seem to be as trusting as the other birds, and always watched me as if waiting for me to do something unexpected. I found a caterpillar crawling on the chicken wire and tossed it to the turkeys. This resulted in a mad rush to get the juicy bug and a short game of chase and steal until one managed to eat it. I closed and locked the chicken coop and went off to water my garden. It was a calm, cool morning, and there was dew on the grass in the backyard. The sun was almost to the top of the trees on the horizon, and had not yet got high enough to make it annoyingly warm. As the water flowed on my garden, I looked out to the woods, and wondered if there was anything interesting there I had not found yet. The water began to stand at the top of the dirt in the garden, indicating I had watered sufficiently, and I turned it off. Just as I turned to head for the woods, I heard my dad call me from the back porch. "Hey, Kevin, get in the truck," he said. "You're coming with me to the new shop today." Without saying anything, I got into the truck and settled in for the ride. Not that I was disappointed or anything. In fact, I was quite pleased to be going to the shop, since it meant I would have lunch out somewhere and at least a couple cans of soda during the day. If I was lucky, Dad would choose to go to my favorite Mexican restaurant for lunch. It was a pretty good prospect, considering they served beer. Arriving at the new shop, we rolled in through a large, high, double-fenced gate and pulled up by what I thought looked like a sales office. When I got out of the truck and looked around, I realized this used to be a lumber yard. Two large garage bays next to the office had mechanics signs over them, and next to these was an indent in the building before the next 4 garage bays which had body shop signs over them. The last bay had been segregated from the rest with its own doors inside the big garage door, and I knew this was the spray booth, where cars and trucks were painted. Across the parking lot was a large gray tin warehouse. After a quick assessment of the area, I knew exactly what I had to do first. "Hey, Dad," I said, "where's the bathroom?" He pointed to the indent between the bays, and I wandered over there. The first door I opened, straight to the back, turned out to be the electrical and compressor room. Closing this door, I saw another door down a small corridor, and this turned out to be a small storage room with a staircase leading up to the offices upstairs. At the end of the corridor was a bathroom, complete with a large round hand sink, several toilet stalls, and a shower. When I came out of the bathroom, I found my dad in the body shop bays bolting a new fender onto a car. Seeing me, he set his wrench down and told me to follow him as he headed out the door. We walked across the parking lot to the big tin warehouse. The warehouse had no doors on the ends, and a vehicle could drive in one end and out the other. Inside, there were 3 school buses parked end to end, and we walked to the last one. "Okay, you get to put your masking skills to use today," he said. "I have a rolling scaffold already set up with a masking machine and plenty of tape. I need you to mask all the windows and lights on the bus." I looked at the bus and almost immediately felt overwhelmed. There were about 20 windows on each side of the bus, plus the windshield and the back of the bus. This would take forever. He rolled the yellow scaffold to the back of the bus, right up close to the right side windows, and motioned for me to climb on. I climbed the steps onto the work platform and found that the windows were easy to reach. The top of the window was about eye level, and the bottom could be reached by kneeling. I grabbed a roll of tape and began to carefully outline the window frame. Once the outline was complete, I turned to the other side of the platform and pulled a long piece of masking paper from the machine and lifted it up to rip it on the cutter. The machine automatically installed tape to one edge of the paper, making it easy to put in place. By keeping a roll of tape on my wrist, I could easily seal the edges after folding the paper over. I was able to do 2 windows at a time before it was necessary to climb down and roll the platform along to the next pair. It was not taking very long to do each window, and I figured I should have the first side close to complete by lunchtime. I was putting the finishing touches on the 7th window when movement to my left caught my eye. I looked to the movement and saw a couple of rabbits hopping around in the back lot of the shop, around a bunch of piles of bricks and cinder blocks. I had no choice. I had to investigate and see what these rabbits were up to. Climbing down from the scaffold, I took the roll of tape from my wrist and left it on the scaffold as I headed out to the back lot. The rabbits were playing, and upon seeing me, quickly ran under a nearby pallet of cinder blocks. I went over and looked where they went, and found they were trapped in a dead end. Reaching in, I herded one out and picked it up. The rabbit cowered in my arms as if frightened to death as I held it, so I gently stroked its ears and back to let it know I would not hurt it. After a few minutes, it seemed to sense it was not in danger and relaxed as it began to sniff at my shirt. Petting the rabbit, I looked at the pallets of block and bricks in the back lot. They had little signs on them, and I recognized them from a brick factory that was behind our last house in Lake Station. I always wondered where the bricks went when I saw the trucks leaving the factory. "Hey, Kevin, what are you doing?" Dad called. I looked over and saw him standing at the back entry to the warehouse. "Just checking out the rabbits," I said, and started to walk over, stroking the rabbit. "That's a wild rabbit, you know," Dad said, shaking his head. "We don't hunt rabbits in the hot months because they have fleas that carry rabbit fever." "Yeah, I know, but I was not planning to eat him. Just be friends for a little while," I said, and put down the rabbit to accept the can of soda my dad brought. Besides, I looked and he did not have any fleas. The rabbit did not seem to care that it was free. It just sat on the ground next to me as if listening to us talk. I reached down and petted him once more and gave him a little nudge back toward his friend, who was sitting outside the blocks watching us. He took the hint and casually hopped to his buddy where they began to play again. Dad was looking at the masking I had already completed. "This looks good," he said, and headed back to the other shop. I drank about half the soda and set the can on the iron frame of the warehouse. I did not want to put it on the scaffold where I might kick it over. Climbing up, I put the tape back on my wrist and continued masking. At lunchtime, one of the other guys came and got me, and I joined Dad in the shop for lunch. He bought me another soda and handed me a brown sack with a hamburger and French fries. Sitting on a 5-gallon bucket with the food sitting on another bucket in front of me, I listened to my dad and the other guys as they talked. Mostly it was about fishing and hunting, but there were a couple of dirty jokes that I was reminded not to let my mother know I had heard. Then Dad regaled them with how he had gone to check on me earlier that morning and found me out back petting a wild rabbit. I was asked how I caught it, and they seemed amazed that I had not needed a trap or anything. I really did not see what the big deal was. Then the man they all called Professor turned to me. "I understand you like bugs," he said, taking a bite from his burger. "What's your favorite?" "I like bees and wasps," I said matter of fact. "There are so many different ones, and they all look neat." He laughed and then asked, "Okay, so what's your least favorite bug?" That was easy to answer. "Cockroaches," I said without hesitation. "I agree. I do not like roaches either," he grinned. "Well, not the crawling kind anyway." I nodded in agreement as I stuffed my mouth with fries, but I wondered what he meant by not the crawling kind. What other kind of roaches were there? "Why do they call you Professor?" I asked. "Why? Because I am a professor, I suppose," he said. "I teach automotive technologies at the college and work in body shops during the summer to keep my skills up." "Okay, Professor," I said and smiled. "So, you interested in becoming an entomologist?" he asked. "A bug doctor?" I thought about it for a few minutes as I finished my fries. What does an entomologist do? I'm sure they're invaluable to people studying disease vectors, and there are applications for the use of beneficial insects in agriculture. But other than that, what does a bug doctor do to make a living while they spend their lives fascinated by insects? It was lack of answers to questions like these that had thwarted my brother and I from becoming bug specialists. Well, that and all the time being told to get them dang bugs out of the house. "Oh, I don't know," I said. "I have a hard time studying them with my mom all the time telling me not to bring bugs in the house, and they do not have very good books about bugs at school. I search the library and all I find are picture books for little kids." He nodded and looked thoughtful before getting up to put his trash in the can. "I will talk with you a little later. I have to go to the booth and spray some parts before I leave this afternoon." I watched him disappear into the paint booth and looked around. Dad was already at the workbench mixing primer in his spray gun to put on the car he was working on, and the other two guys were nowhere to be seen. I put my trash in the can and went back across to the bus to keep on masking windows. That evening when the work was done, Dad and the other guys hung around their trucks drinking beer after the shop was all locked up. I was laying back in the bed of the truck just listening to them and wondering how long before we were headed home, because I was getting very hungry. Then the last of the beer was gone, and as we were getting ready to go, the professor came and handed me a book. "Here you go," he said. "Your dad told me about your interest in bugs, and I kept this in my car in case I got to meet you." It was a college textbook about entomology, the study of bugs. "Wow, thanks, Professor." "Keep on studying," he said as he was getting in his car. "There's lots of things to learn." I watched him drive off, and then Dad came out of the bathroom and we climbed in the truck. After dinner, I took the book into the porch area to read, but I was asleep before I even got past the introduction. I guess it had been a pretty busy day. The next day I was back at the shop, masking the bus again. I finished the first side and the front end and was just getting started on the second side when the professor came over to look at my work. He looked at the masking on the windows of the side I had already done, and then the windshield before coming over and watching me. "You are really good at that," he said, leaning on the side of the scaffold. "I have students in second-year classes that are not as good. You seem to have a natural talent for working with your hands." "Thanks," I said, not knowing what else to say. "So what do you do with your summertime when you're not here with your dad?" he asked. I told him about building the fort, tending the birds in my garden, hunting snakes and bugs, and exploring the woods. Then I told him about meeting Gracie and how she was not there and the cabin was all rotted when I went back. This seemed to pique his interest, and he listened intently. I also told him about the cold spots I kept feeling in the farmhouse and how I sometimes saw shadows, but there was no one there when I looked closer. "You know, cold spots have been associated with ghosts," the professor said. "Something about there being no heat where they are, so when they come into our plane of existence, they absorb the heat around them." "That is what Grandpa said too," I replied. "But what I do not understand is why they come around. We cannot do anything for them since we can't really see them or talk to them." "As I understand it," he began, "sometimes they come back because they were not done living. Or they miss someone. Or maybe they're still trying to find something they lost when they were alive." I listened carefully. If I could benefit from listening to anyone, surely a professor would be a good source of information. "I think the most important thing to realize is that they are not here to hurt us," he continued. "There's something they need or want that is only in this life. Which is not to say that there are not bad ghosts, or rather demons, but it sounds to me like it was someone from the family that died in the house from what you described." I finished masking the window I was doing, and when I turned around to climb down and move the scaffold, he was already gone. We did go to the Mexican restaurant that day, as I hoped, and Dad stopped and bought a case of beer and ice on his way back to the shop. That evening, when the work was done, the guys brought chairs out to sit in a rough circle by the trucks while they drank. It seemed everyone wanted to party because it was Friday night. Kicking back in the bed of my dad's truck, I looked up at the fading light and watched as the stars began to come out. I knew this would be a longer night than most because today was payday and all of the guys had bought beer at lunch for the evening. So I did my best to keep myself amused as I listened to them talk. As usual, the talk began with hunting and fishing tales, each man trying to tell a better lie than the other until in defeat someone would resort to a dirty joke, and this would usually round out the night with some laughs. Tonight, though, the dirty jokes reached a new level that would make even a lady of the night blush, and it kept devolving into stories of conquest. Of course, I was 10 going on 11 and not yet interested in girls in more than a passing way, so these stories were a bit much for me. I jumped out of the pickup and asked my dad for some change for the soda machine. He freely poured coins into my hand and I went off to get a drink, only to find the machine out of everything except diet soda, and I could not drink diet soda. When I told him about this, he handed me a can of beer without a second thought and went back to telling his story. It was not the first time I had beer, but I was thirsty, so I drank it all almost immediately. The alcohol triggered a sudden need to use the restroom, so I headed off to do my business. By the time I was done and coming back, the alcohol was also affecting my head, and I knew I was what they called buzzed. I recall feeling extremely mellow, like everything was good in the world, and even the lighting of the naked bulbs along the walkway were perfect. The sound of the others' voices drew me in, and I slowly walked back to where they were gathered. As I came back toward the group, I saw the professor take a reddish home-rolled cigarette from his pocket and light it. I figured he was just trying to save money like my uncle who rolled his own and let it go. until the smell wafted across to me when he lit it. I knew that smell, because my dad sometimes smoked that stuff when he was around rougher men than those here. At first, I was shocked. He was a professor, one of the good guys. They were not supposed to do that stuff. My mind went back in time a couple years to Phoenix, when my dad took me to the Ice Capades. As we were walking to the venue from parking, I saw a woman in distress on the sidewalk across the street. Ranting, raving, curling up on the sidewalk. At the time, I didn't understand she was in withdrawal and asked my dad. He said she was on dope. This formed a serious picture in my mind against dope. Like I've said, I was a good student and prided myself on being polite, always having my shirt tucked in, and being neat. I had a certain naive moral code that I followed, and smoking dope was on the bad list. And now, the professor, a learned man I respected and held in very high regard, was smoking dope. A bit of my moral granite was chipped away that evening. I was crushed. I hope you enjoyed this look into the campaign at Fort Stix. That's all for now, but I'll be back again next week with another story, just for you. Until then, sleep well.